My wife's sister moved into our house while I was recovering from surgery, spent $38,000 of our savings across 47 separate transactions in 6 weeks, then told me I was the one with control. Issues, and the only reason I found out is because our bank sent a fraud alert to my phone while I was still in the recovery ward. I want to start with that fraud alert. Because the specific moment of reading it, the specific light in that recovery room at 11 p.m., the specific sound of the floor of a hospital at that hour, the specific weight of a phone in. Hands that were still a little weak from the IV that moment is the one I keep returning to when I try to understand how all of this happened. Not because it was the worst moment. It was actually the beginning of the end for all of them. But because it was the moment where two realities existed simultaneously. The reality of a man lying in a hospital bed who had just had a significant surgery and was supposed to be recovering, and the reality of a bank account being systematically emptied 4 miles away by a woman who had told my wife she was there to help. I want to tell you about what we had before any of this, because I think it matters to understand what was being taken from. Sarah and I had been married for 3 years when this happened. We had met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Charlotte, I know. That sounds like the setup for a romantic comedy, and the thing that I remember most from that first night is not a single line or a specific moment, but the specific quality of her attention. The way she listened. She was the kind of person who listened with her whole face, who asked the second question after the answer, who remembered what you had said 40 minutes ago and came back to it. We dated for 2 years and got married in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Asheville that felt, from the inside, exactly as right as we had hoped it would. Our apartment in Charlotte was the first home I had ever fully owned rather than rented. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that had better natural light than most kitchens do, a small office space where I worked 3 days a week. We had found it in February, moved in by March, and by the fall of our first year, there had accumulated the specific character of a place that is being genuinely lived in Sarah's books in the living room, organized by color, because that is how her brain works. My coffee equipment on the counter that she called excessive, but had stopped complaining about because the coffee was excellent. A spare bedroom that we had mostly used for storage and occasional guests. That spare bedroom is where Jessica moved when I went into surgery. I want to tell you about the small signals first, because there were 3 of them, and I rationalized every one. The first signal was at a family dinner in the spring. Jessica had said, with what I thought was casual interest, that our apartment was really nice and that it was so much more comfortable than where she was living. She had been through a rough stretch of lease situation that hadn't worked out, and I had noticed Sarah telling her she was welcome anytime. I thought that was Sarah being generous. I did not read the operational planning in it. The second signal was a month before the surgery. Jessica had started visiting more frequently, twice in 2 weeks, where the previous pattern had been once a month or less. She had commented on the guest room's closet space. She had measured something in the kitchen with her hand. I had not connected these observations because they had each appeared to be nothing. The third signal, which I understand now was not a signal at all, but a notification I chose not to receive, was the week before my surgery. Sarah had said she was thinking of having Jessica stay over during the recovery period, just to help. I had said that sounded fine. I had meant, during the first week, the hardest week, when I would actually need someone there when Sarah was at work. I had not meant, indefinitely, with full account access, operating as a co-tenant of a home she did not live in or pay for. But that is not a conversation I got to finish. Because a week later, I was being wheeled into an operating room, and by the time I was wheeled out, Jessica was already in the spare bedroom with her suitcases. The recovery room at the hospital where I had the surgery was on the 4th floor, north-facing, which meant that at night it looked out at the building across the street rather than the city. There was a specific glow from the building across windows lit at irregular intervals, the orange-blue fluorescent office lighting that someone had left on, and it came through the blinds of my room in horizontal stripes that changed slightly as the wind moved things outside. I had been given my phone back at around 7 in the evening. Sarah had visited. She had been there when I came out of surgery, which I know because I have a photograph she took that I have no memory of being taken, which is what anesthesia does, and had left at 9 when visiting hours ended. The nurse had done a check 10:30. At 11, the room was quiet in the way hospital rooms are quiet, which is not silence, but the specific managed well-whistle sound of a building that is always awake but tries to be respectful about it. My phone was on the side table to my right. I picked it up because I could not sleep, and I had not yet learned the specific lesson that hospital nights teach, which is that you should not check anything important at 11 p.m. when you are recovering from surgery and your defenses are at their lowest. I had a notification from our bank, a fraud alert, a transaction outside normal patterns. I opened it. The first transaction was for $807 at a home goods store. I recognized the store Sarah and I had shopped at together twice since moving to Charlotte. I thought, maybe Sarah bought something for the apartment. Maybe something broke. I would ask her. Then I scrolled down. Another transaction. Same day, same afternoon. A spa. $340. Then a restaurant. Then a clothing store. And the cash withdrawal $600 described only as ATM, then a location that was not near our apartment. These were not from today. The fraud alert had been triggered by a pattern the bank system had detected across the previous 11 days. I pulled up the full statement. There were 19 transactions in 11 days. 19. And the date of the first one was the day I went into surgery. The morning of. The first charge had processed at 11:42 a.m. I had been in the operating room since 9:15. I lay in that hospital bed with the horizontal stripes of borrowed office light across the ceiling, and I looked at my phone for a very long time. My hands were not shaking. I want to be accurate about that. What I felt was not panic and not rage. What I felt was the specific coldness of something becoming very clear. The kind of clarity that is uncomfortable not because it is confused, but because it is not. I opened the bank app. I changed the account password from my hospital bed. Then I called the bank's fraud line and reported the pattern and requested a temporary freeze on outgoing transactions. The woman on the phone was professional and efficient and asked me to confirm several items and told me a specialist would call in the morning. Then I called Sarah. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Is everything okay? Are you in pain?" I said, "I need you to tell me who has access to our joint account." The conversation that followed was the first version of a conversation I would have 3 more times over the next 8 weeks, each time with more information and less patience. Sarah told me she had shared the login with Jessica just so she could pick up things if we needed them. She said she had meant groceries, essentials. She said she hadn't thought to put a limit on it. She said she was sorry, she would talk to Jessica. She didn't think Jessica would. I said, "There are 19 transactions in 11 days. Sarah went quiet. I said, "Starting the day I went into surgery." She said, "I'll handle it." I said, "I've already frozen the account." She said in the tone she uses when she is managing something she cannot manage. "Let's talk about this when you're feeling better, okay? You just had surgery. You need to rest." That sentence. "Let's talk about this when you're feeling better." I understand what Sarah was doing in that moment. She was trying to protect me from stress during a medical recovery. But what she was also doing, whether she understood it or not, was buying Jessica 3 more weeks. And in 3 more weeks, 28 more transactions would clear before the freeze fully propagated through all the linked accounts. Total damage, $38,218 across 47 transactions. In 6 weeks, I was discharged 4 days later. I came home to an apartment that had Jessica in it. I want to describe this with the specificity it deserves, because came home to find her there doesn't capture what it actually meant. I came home from 4 days of surgical recovery, walked through the front door of my own home, and there was a person in the kitchen who was not my wife, who had brought a second suitcase since the first, who had put her own things on the kitchen counter, including a skincare routine that had colonized the left side of the sink, who said, "Welcome home," with the specific warmth of someone who is very comfortable in a space they do not pay for. I said, "Hi, Jessica." I went to our room. I lay down. Sarah brought me water and sat next to me on the bed, and I looked at the ceiling and I said, "I need the full account statement." Sarah brought me her laptop. I went through it. Let me tell you what $38,219 looks like when it has been spent in 6 weeks by someone who was supposed to be helping. It looks like a MacBook Pro at $2,949, 2 spa visits totaling $60-80, 14 restaurant charges ranging from $34.80 to $147,847, $4,320 in cash withdrawals from ATMs, none of which are near our home, a clothing purchase of $1,004 at a boutique I had never heard of, home goods totaling $3,847, which I will note were for items that were now in the spare bedroom that Jessica was occupying. She had furnished her temporary residence with our money. A gym membership activation fee, $199. For a gym I did not belong to. A streaming service subscription. A grocery delivery charge that was $847 for a single order, which I stared at for a long time. And $4,200 listed simply as miscellaneous cash. $4,200 in cash. Gone. No description. No location. Gone. I closed the laptop. I sat on the edge of the bed. I thought about the specific quality of each of those 47 decisions, each one of which had required Jessica to look at a total, enter a payment, and confirm. 47 times she had looked at an amount of our money and decided, yes, this is mine to take. 47 deliberate choices. I called my friend Terrence that evening. Terrence is an attorney in Charlotte who specializes in civil disputes. I had used him twice before for small matters. I trusted his judgment and I trusted his directness. I told him what I had. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you have the statement with all 47 transactions?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And she had explicit login access. Sarah gave it to her?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay. I want you to document everything before you say another word to Jessica. Don't confront her. Don't have Sarah confront her. Don't have Sarah confront her. Give me the statement and let me send a demand letter." I said, "How clean is this?" He said, "You want honesty? I've worked harder to build weaker cases. I know Terrence told me not to confront Jessica before the demand letter. I know that. I also know that I had been in my apartment for 4 days recovering from surgery while Jessica was in the guest bedroom. And on the 5th evening, she sat down at our dinner table and said, while eating food I had paid for, that she thought OP, meaning me, might benefit from some financial management resources because she had noticed we had a lot tied up in savings that wasn't working for us. I looked at her. I looked at her for a long time. I said, "Jessica, I know about the transactions." She said, "What transactions?" I said, "All 47 of them." She put her fork down. Then she said, and I want you to hear the sentence exactly as she said it, because it is the most clarifying sentence in this entire story. She said, "I was helping. I was here every day taking care of things while you were in the hospital. You should be grateful your family is here supporting you instead of making this about money. Grateful," she said. "I should be grateful for the MacBook, for the spa days, for the $4,200 in cash, for the gym membership at a gym I don't belong to." She said I should be grateful. I said, "Okay, Jessica." I picked up my plate. I went to our room. I called Terrence and told him the confrontation had happened and that she had said exactly what I expected her to say. He said, "Good. That actually helps us. Did she deny taking the money?" I said. "She said she was helping." He said, "Even better. Send the letter tomorrow. Has someone ever taken from you and then told you to be grateful for the taking?" Drop a comment if that sentence landed the way I think it landed. On the evening the demand letter was sent, Sarah went to her mother's house. Not permanently. She came back 3 days later. But that evening, when the demand letter arrived and Jessica called Sarah in tears and Sarah had to make a choice about whose reality to occupy, she got in her car and she drove to Donna's house in Concord, which is 40 minutes from Charlotte on I-85 North. I was alone in our apartment. I want to tell you about that night because I think it matters. Not because it was the most painful night, it wasn't. But because it was the night where the full shape of what had happened became clear in a way that it hadn't been while other people were in the space. The apartment was very quiet. The kitchen counter still had Jessica's skincare routine on the left side of the sink. She had taken her suitcases, but had left several things in the hurry of leaving, which I photographed and labeled and sent to Terrence as additional documentation of her extended residency. The spare bedroom had the furniture she had purchased with our money, which was now relevant to the civil claim, and which I also photographed with timestamps. I made coffee, not because I needed it at 10 p.m., but because I needed to do something with my hands that was mine. My coffee equipment, the thing Sarah called excessive, the thing that had stayed on that counter since March of the previous year, made the apartment smell like something familiar and real. And I stood at the counter in the quiet of a home that had been invaded and then emptied out, and I drank the coffee and I looked at the kitchen and I thought, we are going to have to rebuild this. Not just the money, all of it. The account, the trust, the specific quality of a Saturday morning in a home where the person who was supposed to be safe had shown you exactly how conditional that safety was. I sent Terrence a text that said, "I'm ready for whatever comes next." He texted back, "Good." Because Jessica just hired a lawyer. I'm going to tell you what happened when Jessica hired a lawyer, because her lawyer strategy is the part of this story that still makes Terrence laugh when he thinks about it. Jessica's attorney filed a response to the demand letter arguing that the account access had been granted voluntarily and without restrictions by a joint account holder, that Jessica had acted in good faith to support household needs during a medical emergency, and that any claim of unauthorized spending was undermined by the fact that the authorization was explicitly given. This argument had one significant problem. The argument was essentially correct as a description of what had happened. Sarah had given the access voluntarily, without restrictions. The problem was that it established that Sarah's authorization existed, which meant the civil claim needed to come not against Jessica alone, but against the specific nature of the spending. And the specific nature of the spending, the MacBook, the spa days, the $4,200 in unspecified cash, did not meet the legal standard of household needs during a medical emergency by any reasonable interpretation. Terrence filed a response that attached all 47 transactions as Exhibits A through AU, with each transaction labeled by category and a brief notation of how it did or did not relate to household needs during a medical emergency. The spa visits were Exhibit G and H. The MacBook was Exhibit N. The gym membership activation was Exhibit Q. The judge, when she reviewed the filing, scheduled a hearing. At the hearing, Jessica's attorney attempted to argue that the MacBook was a work necessity Jessica had needed to perform remote support functions for the household. Terrence asked Jessica under oath what remote support functions she had performed. Jessica said she had handled communications. Terrence asked her to name 3. She named one, scheduling a prescription pickup, and then could not name a second. The MacBook argument did not survive the hearing. Jessica's second strategy, deployed through her attorney 4 weeks into the civil process, was to argue that Sarah bore equal responsibility for the spending, because Sarah had authorized the access and had not revoked it for 3 weeks after being notified. This was Jessica's most dangerous move, and I want to be honest that it created the worst 3 weeks of the entire process. Because it put Sarah in the middle directly, legally, in a way that could not be avoided. Sarah received notice that she had been named as a correspondent in a counterclaim. Sarah called me when she got the notice. She was very quiet on the phone. And she said, "She named me." I said, "I know." She said, "She named me in a lawsuit to avoid paying money she took from our account." I said, "Yes." There was a long pause. Then Sarah said, "I need Terrence's number." That sentence, "I need Terrence's number," was the moment I understood that what had been a civil dispute was about to become something much simpler. When the person who had been protecting the other side asks for your attorney's number, the other side has lost its protection. Sarah provided a sworn statement about the specific sequence of events, the access she had granted, the conversation she had with Jessica during the 3-week delay, the specific phrase Jessica had used, "I'm keeping track and I'll pay you back," that Jessica had apparently said to Sarah early in the spending, and which Sarah had believed. That phrase, "I'm keeping track," was the thing that allowed Sarah to believe there was a good faith arrangement in place. There was no record of any repayment plan. There was no record of Jessica keeping track. There was a MacBook and 2 spa days and $4,200 in cash. The counterclaim was dismissed. Civil judgment came through on a Wednesday afternoon. Terrence called me at 2:15. He said, "Full judgment, $38 total, $5,200. I said, "The MacBook?" He said, "Confiscated as part of asset recovery. Sheriff picked it up Thursday." I said, "Okay." He said, "You did everything right." I said, "Thank you, Terrence." He said, "Genuinely, you documented everything from the hospital bed." He froze the account within hours of finding out. "You did not engage in extended confrontation. You let the process run. That's why we won cleanly." I said. I learned it somewhere. I had learned it in the hospital room at 11 p.m., lying in a bed with horizontal stripes of office light across the ceiling, looking at a fraud alert on a phone I could barely hold. I had learned it in that specific moment of cold clarity when I understood that the right response to being wronged while you are most vulnerable is not rage. It is documentation. It is precision. It is a phone call to a bank and then a phone call to an attorney, in that order at 11 p.m. from a hospital bed before the other side even knows you figured it out. Donna sent a card 2 weeks after the judgment. It said, "I hope you're happy now." I kept the card. I photographed it. I sent the photograph to Terrence, who laughed and said he would add it to the file. I was not happy. Happy is not the right word for what I felt, and I want to be precise. What I felt was the specific satisfaction of a thing that was owed being paid. Not completely no civil judgment gives back 6 weeks of a marriage, or the specific quality of a home before it was invaded, or the exact version of Sarah's trust that existed before she gave someone she loved access to something she should have protected. Those things did not come back. They were rebuilt slowly, specifically, in counseling sessions and in conversations that we had and have continued to have. But $5,400 came back. And the MacBook. And every one of those 47 transactions was documented in a public court filing, attached as Exhibits A through AU, with my name on the filing and Jessica's name on the judgment, and not a single thing that couldn't be found. 3 months after the judgment, I opened a new account. Not to separate from Sarah permanently, we are still married. We are in counseling. We are working at it with the specific effort of two people who believe the thing they built is worth the rebuilding. But my attorney had recommended and Sarah had agreed, and I had decided. My earnings would go into my own account from that point forward. Joint expenses would be handled through a dedicated joint account with specific rules, specific notifications, specific limits. No one would have general access to anything I earned without me knowing about it in real time. I opened the new account on a Saturday morning. I sat at the kitchen table to do it the same kitchen table, the same apartment, the kitchen counter that no longer had Jessica's skincare routine on the left side of the sink. My coffee was on the table. The Charlotte Saturday morning was doing something good with the light through the kitchen windows, which face south and catch the morning at an angle that makes everything in the kitchen look very clean and very specific. I filled out the forms. I chose a name for the account. I set the notification preferences so that every transaction above $5 sent an alert to my phone. I submitted the application. The confirmation email arrived in 43 seconds. My name, my account, my money. In an account where the only person who could authorize transactions was me. I drank the rest of my coffee. I looked at the kitchen. I thought about the morning I'd come home from surgery and walked through that door and found Jessica in this kitchen saying, "Welcome home," with the warmth of someone at home. In a space they had no right to. She had not understood something about me. Something I want to say clearly because I think it is the right note to end on. She had looked at a man in a hospital bed and she had seen a resource. She had looked at a man who could not get up and move around and check his accounts and she had seen a window. She had looked at a man who trusted his wife and she had seen access. She'd been wrong about all three things. Not because I am exceptional. Because those three things, the hospital bed, the inability to check accounts, the trust, were temporary. They were the conditions of a single month. What was not temporary was the documentation I started building the moment I saw that fraud alert. What was not temporary was the account number the bank assigned me on a Saturday morning over coffee 3 months later, which will have my name on it for as long as I choose to keep it. Jessica had spent 6 weeks taking things that weren't hers. I have been taking them back ever since. Looking back, and I want to say this honestly, not dramatically, I am grateful for the clarity. Not for the $38,000 that was taken. Not for the weeks of recovery that were turned into something they weren't supposed to be. But for the clarity. Because I know now, with a precision I did not have before, what it looks like when someone decides your trust is a resource. And I know what to do with that knowledge. The account notification preference is set to $5 and above. I have not missed a transaction since. These are the stories nobody planned to tell. That's why they feel the way they do.